Hi everyone, Fresh here, and I'm here to review an optic that was sent in by a friend and fellow content creator, Nurse Dude. This channel thus far has been focusing on fixed magnification prism optics with the occasional smattering of a red dot or two. However, I do have a lot of background and experience firsthand on variable power optics, and I've definitely owned a few LPVOs in my time. I've had my reservations about them, but Nurse believes that I may be able to come back to them with this one.
At that time, HiLux, Leatherwood HiLux, excuse me, at SHOT Show had released a new version of their newest LPVO at the time, which boasted a near perfect 1 power to 4 power. With that, I immediately ordered it as soon as it came out, and I had held on to it for a very, very, very long time, mostly due to the fact of the reticle being just perfect for what I wanted out of it.
Let's take a quick look at this guy. Just a quick note here, this is a worn skeleton mount that I did put on for this video. This is very nice. I like it to put it on my hard-kicking rifles like my 308. This is a scope made by a company called HiLux. This is actually a brand that I have been familiar with for a little bit. They sometimes go by HiLux Leatherwood. They typically would make scopes that are either originals or reproductions of those on Buffalo rifles, or even some Vietnam era and maybe even some World War I or World War II style optical scopes. They do make some very nice products, and I've been very curious, in this case, looking at this thing, of what an LPVO by them would turn out to be. This is called a HiLux CMR 1:4, so your lowest setting for this LPVO is a 1x, and your highest setting is a 4x. Upon initial inspection here, the build quality looks very good. The finish is quite even. I don't see any marks from any scope rings that are absolutely immediately visible. Looks like Nurse did take care of the scope very well. And in general, the finish looks pretty robust from here. Looks like to be a straight tube in front. This looks to be a 24 millimeters. So it's a 1:4 by 24, I believe. This looks kind of familiar based on some Nikons that I've seen. What are some of the features I could think about on this? There's some very large cap turrets here. These are not what I would call low profile, but you know, they definitely look pretty cool. There's an illumination knob right here, so that's kind of nice to have at the back bell of the scope. You have your zoom lever with half magnification gradations in between in a non-linear fashion. The lettering looks quite nice here. It's a font that I'm actually not really used to. I'll have to see what that one is. There's markings for your elevation and windage, and then there's another font for the model name and the brand. Of course, worn scope out as well. The model here is called the CMR4-R, and most likely that indicates the kind of reticle this thing is. But let's get an idea of, you know, what the feel of this thing is like, and just kind of holding in the hand. With the mount, I think this feels relatively light. It's definitely heavier than a prism, but it doesn't seem all that bad. We'd probably have to mount it on a rifle to see how it balances based on the eye relief, the placement that results from this, etc. If you think about the illumination knob, very nice clicks here, extremely tactile. What I like about that is they definitely feel very good in the hand, but they're very quiet. This, I think, is tactically advantageous to have. Looks to have about 10 daytime illumination settings and 3 night vision settings, which I think for an LPVO is quite ambitious. We're going to probably take a look at that a little bit later. You have the bell, the name and model again. It looks like there's a spring adjustment screw here, perhaps for the turrets. I don't think that's any nitrogen purging exactly. So we have these splined scope caps. Sounds like aluminum to me, nicely threaded. They feel pretty good. Do they utilize an O-ring of any sort? I don't see anything in this case, but they do feel like they fit pretty tightly and softly. And we have a very generous MRAD turret for both your windage and elevation. Funny thing here, Maybe my brain didn't really recognize this. I've been outed to be shooting left-handed sometimes. This is a left-handed LPVO in a sense. So if your trigger hand is on the left, or your trigger and your grip hand is on your left, so will your windage knob. So that's quite interesting. Let's hear the clicks here. Very loud, very tactile. Is there a little mush? A tiny bit, but not all that bad. So if you're a person who's kind of a snob for, you know, the clicks, as some of the Vortex guys are sometimes, this will suit you quite well. That's limited travel. That actually appears to be a zero stop, which is nice. So most likely you have an adjustable zero stop here. You do have some lettering. 1 click equals 0.1. Oh, okay, give you all the conversions here. That is a nice touch. I like that. It seems to be a cost-reducing measure for some LPVO manufacturers to just take that stuff out. I think this is a nice thing to remind you, especially if you're a little bit forgetful. About here, yeah, same thing. It gives you your left and your right. I like the gradations this way, instead of just giving you numbers one direction or the other, which gets confusing. They give you the left, in this case the right, or left designation for your windage. I really like that. It's a good touch. Some premium scopes have it. I'm a big fan of that. Again, pretty tactile clicks, both sides. What else is here? We do have a diopter ring. Actually feels pretty good. And this is definitely a quick set diopter ring, so it does come out pretty quick. The threading is fairly coarse. Oh, okay, nice. They have a marking for your diopter setting here. Maybe it's a finer adjustment, to be honest. I could be wrong there. But that's nice. That feels good. It doesn't really feel like it's going to go anywhere. The damping on this is quite nice. What about the zoom ring? This is something I tend to be a little bit particular about, whether or not there is a handle for the lever. Okay. That's quite nice. You have your 1 setting, 2, 2.5, 3, all the way to 4. Okay, this is interesting. This is very easy to engage, to get going. There isn't a whole lot of torque required to get the zoom ring spinning. But the faster you try to spin it, the more it resists. There is some kind of grease here that was chosen for its viscosity, which, if I may put an equation here as to what I'm talking about. This is going to be in the rotational regime. It's probably, or rotational realm, rotational coordinates in this case. The torque required to get this thing going is low, but the torque required to keep it going is high. It's what I would call a damping coefficient on this guy. Again, I don't know if these guys really were thinking about that when they were designing this per se, but this is a very nice feeling zoom ring. It doesn't feel like it's out of control. It's very important if you have a low engagement torque here that the thing goes smoothly and doesn't just overshoot super quickly when you're especially looking at this and when you are switching your zoom settings. So in a pinch, if you're going to go really quickly, this thing will stay in control, but if you need to get it going, it's very gentle. This is one of my favorite zoom rings right now, for sure. Whereas in the Vortex products, the engagement torque to get this thing moving is extremely high without a ring or zoom ring handle. And they have even a bunch of damping to slow that down at the same time, but it's already so hard to keep it moving at the same time. So this is actually very, very nice. I'm just pleasantly surprised by the feel of that thing. I know I'm harping on it quite a bit, but if you're going to have something that is going to adjust nicely between magnification settings, this needs to feel like a good quality here. So far, I have a pretty nice impression of the feel of this thing. I really hope the glass does not disappoint. Let's take a look at that. Like a lot of Chinese glass from primary arms, it's bright and inviting, and maybe even has a couple of warm tones to help with fatigue when it comes to long stints of PID. If we go through the magnification settings a little bit, say to 2x, 3x, and our 4x, we don't lose a whole lot of normalized field of view, and our eye box doesn't tighten up all that badly. The eye relief range also stays fairly consistent and forgiving if you put your head quite in the right spot. One could say, so far so good, right? You have great color representation and image brightness throughout the entire diopter setting range, a crisp image, and a decently sharp reticle to work with. The problems, however, start when you pick this up and try out its 1x setting. Going through all the diopter settings, there's a little bit of lens distortion here. This is not quite what I would call a true 1x. It appears, especially when you go through the diopter settings, that it starts to magnify a little bit. And it's not that kind of magnification where the entire image gets larger. It seems like the center point, especially with objects up close, has the fishbowl effect. In fact, you can see this here in the poles and rafters of the screen door, that there's a little bit of that distortion occurring and local magnification. Also, the illumination settings, this one being the max, isn't quite the brightest during the daytime. This is coming also from low light conditions in this room to the outside on a sunny day. There's a couple of problems, especially if you want to take this out in the desert or an extremely bright day. Most likely, that illuminated reticle will wash out completely. Most likely, this illumination is actually fully suited more for nighttime shooting, where the color of the reticle without illumination would normally be obscured or would be completely washed out by a dark background. For nighttime CQB at 1x, this thing appears to be quite adequate, however. You can also notice that the large circle on the outside, the smaller horseshoe on the inside, and the 1 MOA dot on the very inside and very center, as well as the BDC out to 800 yards, is fully illuminated. Again, using this very nicely calibrated zoom ring, which is highly controllable based on the viscosity of the grease inside, it's very easy to work this optic back and forth without moving the rifle too much. Now, granted, this one is currently on a 308, and it feels pretty at home here. The problem is, with the weight of the optic currently, this being an LPV and all, the entire setup starts to wail in a little bit. Again, working that diopter, we get even more of that magnification or fishbowling effect throughout. And you might see some artifacts of the glass rotating in this case. I can't really blame it. I think Nurse actually took care of this optic quite well. You may notice here, as you get further away from the background itself, that the movement distortion starts to happen. The part that's a little bit disconcerting for me about this 1x is that the image moves back and forth in a way traversing your path of horizontal movement, which appears to speed up the image and cause a bit of lack of control when going from short range to, transitioning from short range target to target. Aiming at that stump over there, you could probably get a quick, easy shot. I believe this is out to the 4x setting. I wouldn't call it this glare, but there's a little bit of color washout. It might be from the camera settings itself, but it's a fairly nice color out into the woods there. Again, bright daylight settings. You can see even with that washout that this reticle is extremely crisp in your sight picture. You can even see backed up against the wall the gradations for your windage, which are pretty ample. I think it was about, you might see gradations for 5 and 10 mils on each side. I'm not even 100% sure how you would plan to compensate for that on something that has a parallax setting of 100 yards. But this could be something that you could use in a cross GPR or SPR setup if you really wanted to. You can notice also on the very top of the scope sight, you do have the name of the reticle. I think it's a CMR4 up there, or a CMR556. It's kind of nice to see that a little bit up in the top, as opposed to reverse etching it like the bottom of the ACOG does when it comes to showing the reticle. And again, there's the fishbowling at 1x, which is unfortunate because the glass on this optic is so nice. Before we see how the HiLux stacks up against its other competitors, let's think about why you would choose an LPVO over a conventional red dot. The LPVO provides the option of magnification, and even under a red dot magnifier setup, You only have a single lens that you need to deal with to implement it. This magnification gives you better personnel identification, a larger field of view, a usable BDC for your long-range shots, and therefore an overall improvement in precision. In addition, there are a few reasons that you may pick an LPVO over a conventional fixed magnification prism. You have a near infinite selection of magnification choices between your low and high setting. You have a fairly wide variety of magnification ranges to choose from in the market. This greater range in magnification also provides more opportunities for PID. You generally get better glass on the higher-end models, drastically increased eye relief, and in some options, the addition of a red dot versus conventional illumination in a prism reticle. Since this is part 1 of this series, I'm not going to go too much in depth in the cons quite yet. Let's look at our 1-4 options. Though 1-4s are slowly becoming less and less common these days, you still have a fairly large selection to choose from. In addition, you have a few wildcards here that you can work with, including a variable prism setup. The objective diameters of most of these scopes is going to be about 24mm, the exception being the Leupold VX2 1-4, which is just a little bit smaller. All the scopes presented here, due to weight, price, and reticle size constraints, are going to be second focal plane. Since 4x is not an awfully disorienting upper end magnification, second focal plane works in that case for having a reticle trued both for 1x and for 4x. Let's compare the field of view here amongst our competitors. Primary Arms' classic 1-4 gives us a field of view of 24 feet at 100 yards. The Nikon MTAC 1-4, a scope I used to own, has a fairly generous field of view at the top magnification of nearly 30 feet at 100 yards. Compared to the PA 1-4, this ends up yielding a norm score of 120. In fact, it's likely that the actual field of view at 1x is even larger than that. Bushnell's AR 1-4 has a pretty decent field of view of 27 feet at 100 yards, yielding a norm score of 108. Vortex's current offering is the Crossfire 2 1-4, having an FOV of about 24 feet at 100 yards, yielding a score of 96, which is similar to the Primary Arms. An older Vortex 1-4 that you can still buy some places is the Viper PST 1-4, having an FOV of 26.5 feet at 100 yards, with a norm score of 110. Swamp Fox, a newcomer in this segment, has their Tomahawk 1-4, which has about 23.6 feet at 100 yards and yielding a score of 94.4. Burris has a nice but discontinued scope, which is the MTAC 1-4, yielding an FOV of 26 feet and a norm score of 104. Steiner's P4XI is one of the premium options in this segment, giving you an FOV of 27.5 and norm score of 110. And likely the actual 1X is even larger than this. Your two options from Athlon would be your Talos BTR 1-4 and your HiLux BTR 1-4.5. Your Talos is at about 26 and 104 respectively, and your HiLux is at 22 and 99. SIG's current Tango 4 1-4 offering actually has a military contract right now with an FOV of 23.6 at 100 yards, yielding a score of 94.4. Not quite good in this segment, surprisingly. Trijicon has a fairly wide line of LPVOs to choose from in this 1-4 segment, each of which have different features in mind. The AccuPower is a conventional battery-powered illuminated version. The AccuPoint TR24 is a fiber optic illuminated with still adjustable illumination, somewhat like an ACOG. Your AccuPoint TR24 is a evolution of the ACOG in variable form and with adjustable fiber optic illumination and tritium. Your Credo 1-4 being a high-end illuminated version of this, and your Scent 1-4, which is meant to be a budget-friendly option. All of these have a field of view of about 24 feet at 100 yards, yielding a norm score of 96. Likely the actual field of view is closer to about 100. Leupold's VX2 is fairly competitive in this segment, with a field of view of 28.5 feet at 100 yards, yielding a norm score of 114. This comparison wouldn't be complete without the presence of a prism, such as this Elcan Spectre DR 1X4X, which has a field of view of 34.2 feet at 100 yards, yielding an impressive norm score of 136.8. The actual 1x field of view is somewhere closer to 145 feet at 100 yards, which is massive. Where does our HiLux stand in this? Well, it still has a decent field of view at 26 feet at 100 yards and a norm score of 104, about middle of the pack. If we compare eye relief a little bit, most of these lower end LPVOs that we call them, or cheaper options, tend to be between 3.7 to 4 inches. Our Bushnell AR124 and our HiLux here are about 3.5 inches, whereas our middle of the pack Trigicons, our Sig Tango 124 and the Helios BTR 1 to 4.5 are at the lower end at just barely above 3 inches. The Elcan, being a prism, has a predictably dismal eye relief. Now, since these are variable power optics, you would expect a little bit more precision from them, or at least a precision mindset associated with them. Most of these are set at a fixed parallax of 100 yards, which I think is mostly fine, but I'm surprised that some of these manage to still have a parallax setting or zero parallax zone of 50 yards. This is surprising to me because you would expect that if you wanted personnel identification and a little bit more precision, you would want it to be fairly parallax free towards at least as long of a distance as possible. And I think this is where the Athlon 1 to 4.5 really shines in this precision sector, with a adjustable parallax setting out to infinity. This is why also, in my opinion, I think LPVOs could really benefit from having an adjustable parallax. It doesn't even have to be infinite exactly, perhaps out to 600 or 700 yards or meters. More complaining on that later though. Upon first glance, this 1 to 4 segment has some fairly light optics. The Crossfire 2, MTAC 1 to 4, and AccuPoint TRS-24 are at less than 15 ounces, and in a sense could compete with the ACOG. However, when considering the weight of a lightweight mount, such as that offered by Aero Precision, you're going to get way past that territory, even if the ACOG had a top-mounted RMR. Loophole claims that the VX2 1 to 4 might be closer to 12.4 ounces with mount, and I'm not 100% sure if I believe that, so I might need to grab one and weigh it myself. In the middle of the pack, your weights will surely balloon to about 20 to 22 ounces. The Elcan Spectre may look like the heaviest optic in the bunch at first, but with mount, it tends to be not that much higher than the others. Due to several extra features, the Helios BTR tends to be the porkiest one here in the bunch, at about 26.3 ounces. Another crucial factor when it comes to choosing a low-power variable optic is the price that you're expecting to pay on the street. Your primary arms, Nikon, Bushnell, and Vortex Crossfire 2, should yield anywhere between $130 to $250, a reasonable entrance fee for a variable power optic of any sort. The HiLux that we're reviewing here fits somewhere in the lower to mid-tier pricing, which is there with the Leupold VX2, your Burris MTAC 1 to 4, your Swamp Fox Tomahawk, and your now discontinued Vortex Viper PST. The Burris, the Athlon Helios, your Sig Tango 4, and your Trigicon Ascent are going to be in the dead center price range. About $400, which is great value in a sense compared to a lot of prisms. If you really want a truly premium experience, your P4XI, AccuPower 1 to 4, AccuPoint 1 to 4, and Credo will give you much better glass and a true 1x setting. Surprisingly, however, you need to pay twice as much as the most expensive Credo 1 to 4 here to get into the Elcan price range, which is really a bit of a shame. In fact, we can score these by taking into account our eye relief, field of view, weight, and price, and come up with a performance metric. Let's call it bang for your buck. This effectively puts your Elcan towards the bottom, your Helios BTR dead last, and very surprisingly, our CMR 1 to 4 is right up there with our more expensive Trigicon optics in terms of bang for your buck. A lot of the cheaper scopes on the very top might be scoring slightly higher in this case, but I think if you decided to review them, they would not quite be as satisfying as you think. Let's see if we can demonstrate some of these reasons why by looking a little bit more closely at our CMR. Now, in terms of gradations and the type of math that you can perform, the CMR4 is one action-packed reticle.
The reticle, which I'm sure you've already displayed, really just kind of spoke to me. It made sense in my head. I liked the ability to have the holdovers along with that kind of horseshoe reticle with the dot in the middle that has kind of become standard now for a lot of optics.
The large partial circle is 36 MOA or 10 mils large. The smaller half circle is about 2.5 mils or 9 MOA. And the center dot is a fairly small and precise 1 MOA for those long distance shots. Below this trifecta is a BDC calibrated out to 800 meters for various cartridges, with a surprisingly well integrated mil scale interspersed. The concentric rings, the BDC, and this interspersed mil scale with proper labels are all illuminated in red. This portion alone would already make a rifleman blush. Never being quite enough, however, you have an extra 30 or 35 mils of elevation available below the illuminated BDC. You also have a fairly generous wind holds out to 5, 10, and 15 mils. At the outset, quite frankly, this may look a little bit excessive. Why would an LPVO that is calibrated out to 100-yard parallax need this much adjustment and calculation room? For example, we can use regular M855 green tip and calculate out to about 700 meters quite accurately in the BDC. When you look a little bit further at the 10, 20, and 30 mil mark, you can easily reach out to 1300 and even 1400 meters, supposedly. The problem is, however, that at sea level, M855 tends to be transonic out of a 16-inch barrel at about 650 to 700 meters. Why would you want all this extra elevation if this is going to be for 556? Like a lot of reticles today, however, even in 2012, HiLux thought about this ahead of time. This BDC, with all of its extra adjustments and wind holds, actually has a place, I believe, on 308 battle rifles. In fact, your wind holds for 168 grain Match King 308 and 62 grain 556 are quite similar out to 800 meters. Even at sea level, the 308 would still remain supersonic, sometimes out to 800 or 1000 meters, depending on the bullet design. Combine this with pretty nasty crosswinds, and your windage holdover scale starts to make a lot more sense. This extended mil scale can also have a secondary function. On top of having a ranging reticle within the BDC, utilizing the width of human shoulders to estimate the distance of a particular adversary, the extended MRAD scale allows you to make multiple measurements of different targets and their heights at different distances. Sometimes you may even use something the size of a mountain to estimate the height and angle and various type of trigonometric functions that might be used for slightly advanced ballistic calculations. Having a reticle like this is not just a ballistic calculator, but almost a fieldcraft or land navigation tool in a sense. I can also admit that the bottom section at the 10, 20, and 30 mil markings can be used with 5.56 and 7.62 for volley fire in order to keep an enemy down. I really have to give it to HiLux for including so many features in one scope like this. Looking again, we could see the BDC for M855 green tip, and a BDC zoomed in also for M193. But they work well enough within the velocity variation of the cartridge. If you're looking for an absolutely perfect BDC scale out to 800 meters, however, you're going to have to look around and play around with optics height, sight-in distance, and a couple of fudge factors within the BDC. I don't have a rating system yet for reticles, but I would give this one an A+ so far. This is something usable anywhere from a 5.56 to a larger semi-automatic 300 Win Mag if you wanted. With a lower scope mount, you can utilize this in a short barrel bolt action rifle setup to great effect as well. I'd have to say, in a sense, that this reticle may make up for the lack of proper 1x within this LPVO. Almost. What this optic lacks in terms of daytime visibility in its illumination, it makes up for quite a bit in its night vision capabilities. This optic comes with 3 night vision settings, a fairly wide diopter range, and enough light transmission to actually be able to use this at night on 1x. It's been an implicit tenet on this channel through my love of prisms that LPVOs don't really work that well under night vision, but this scope has surprised me quite a bit in this case. The 3 concentric circles, the top mil portion, and the complete BDC are perfectly illuminated, crisp, and don't have a whole lot of bloom, especially when you use the adjustable aperture mod on your PVS-14. NV1 is low enough not to obscure certain targets within 30 yards, and NV3 gives you a good boost to cut through the photonic barrier that you may see when dealing with camera lights, infrared illuminators, and other stray light sources during brighter conditions for night vision. This is no EOTech 512 or EXPS3 or even a Sigma Romeo 5. But for an optic like this, it seems to echo a rather premium night vision experience. The CMR1-4 being my first foray into the 1-4 LPVO segment, what do I think of these scopes so far? The advantages and disadvantages of LPVOs over prisms might require a little bit of nuance here.
One thing that I must say that scope, it being so old, it is quite heavy. It is not I'm going to call it the highest tier of quality, but it was pretty good quality back then. So the quality of optics have definitely improved along with the glass and everything. So that's probably one thing that I don't necessarily like now compared to then. And the other one being is that with the design of the reticle, I really think it would have done well with having a slightly higher magnification and also being first focal plane.
The CMR1-4 is anywhere from 1 to 4 times as long as your average fixed magnification prism. Also shown here with the scope and the mount, the entire setup is about twice as heavy. Despite this, however, you almost have 5 different prisms to choose from here. Even if you didn't have a continuously variable magnification, and you had only a few D10s to choose from, you would have a 1x microprism plus some field of view, a 2x GLX prism with an extended field of view as well, a 2.5x with roughly about the same field of view score, a 3x minus a little bit of field of view, and a 4x ACOG to boot minus quite a bit of field of view, all contained within one optic. All of this at only twice the weight and about the same price. Meaning that this entire magnification really is practical and tractable in target transitioning, dynamic movement, and precision shooting. Though yes, you can have an ACOG with an RMR up top, you might be surprised how much of the lower magnifications you might need sometimes under quick transitioning. If the scope had a proper 1x and presented itself much like the Kala's K18i or some older LPVOs with a true 1x, the scope would be a fairly formidable opponent against Prism Gang. And surprisingly enough, this seems to work decently under night vision. Will I be trading in my TA31 for a 1-4 LPVO anytime soon? I'm not 100% sure. In sending this to me, however, Nurse has shown me a fairly unique space that I think could use a little bit of refinement in the LPVO space. These 1-4s aren't terribly bulky, they don't cost a terrible amount, offer a wide range of features to choose from at different price points within the segment, and sometimes come with the most unique and tractable reticles that you can see in any kind of variable optic. Yes, I was disappointed with the less than stellar 1x, but I was really glad that I got to put the scope through its paces. Stay tuned for part 2 of this series. By the time this video is up for a little bit, most likely I will have reached 1,000 subscribers. I never thought that I would be sitting at a computer making this kind of content eventually, but here I am, and you guys brought me here. So I want to thank everybody for their viewership and engagement, as well as your patience and understanding as I'm going through this process. Stay tuned for some merch in a couple weeks, and I'll see you on the range.